I can look out my dining room window and see the complete power plant. It's that close, but it's done our community an awfully lot of good down through the years.
What I've seen and what we've accomplished here has been an outstanding showing of cooperation and getting the job done.
SIPC has meant a lot to me in the years. It was a good place to work, good friendly atmosphere. It was just a rewarding experience to know that you were doing something for the people of the country and all the cooperatives that we serve, trying to produce power as cheap as possible.
I've always been proud of the leadership of SIPC. They've done a good job. And my father was Ray Webb. He was on the original board. Southeastern and Southern and Egyptian always got along good. I say that, but I know there was some dissensions in the early days, but they tried to do what was best for the whole area. Back then, there wasn't the grid, and you had to buy it from wherever you had the extra power to sell close to your area, which was at that day CIPS.
At that time they did 10-year wholesale power contracts with the investor-owned utilities, and in our area that was CIPS. It became a struggle to be able to negotiate what they thought was a fair 10-year contract.
Back at that time, CIPS, they didn't want to help us at all. They wanted to shut us down if they could.
They got really hard to deal with. They wanted to charge more than retail prices almost, so they began to look for some other way to get power.
About 1950, they had a real time negotiating that contract, but finally did get it done, and there was some talk at that time about maybe starting their own generation and transmission company, but they got a 10-year contract. But the next time it came due, then just prior to 1960, they weren't able to do that, and at that time, why the Rural Electrification Administration was in the process of making loans for power plants.
I'd hear some talk about they were going to start maybe trying to figure a way to develop some way to generate their own electricity, and that was big talk. And my dad was on the board. In the 50s, he and some of the other leaders, they would be going to Washington, D.C. to visit congressmen and I guess REA administration people to talk about getting money.
I know my dad made a lot of trips out there. Tim Reeves' dad, Tom, did also. They were the chairman of the co-ops, plus one or two from each co-op that went out there regularly. I don't know how many trips Dad made out there, but an awful lot of them.
Ray Webb was on the board when I came here, Milo Thurston. You know, they were some of the key people that were instrumental in getting this co-op started. I think Ray Holt, who was a manager of Egyptian Electric, was a big push behind getting the loan through REA in the first place. They were the key people in getting this plant off the ground. It was a tough go, but they got it done.
They really had a challenge to get that started. St. Louis, I believe, is where they finally got the permission to go ahead and build it.
They could tell by the sign, Welcome NRECA, that Kiel Auditorium, St. Louis was the place. And 9 o'clock Monday morning, February 22nd, 1960, the time for the 18th annual meeting of your National Rural Electric Cooperative Association to begin.
Delegates, certainly wonderful to have you all back here in St. Louis once again.
That's right. First man up to bat in the opening session is none other than himself, the St. Louis Cardinals' own Stan the Man Musial.
I predict that you will meet the challenges offered by the future. I predict that you will grow even stronger in the process.
David Hamill, he was administrator in the Republican administration. They weren't great about making generation loans, but they were able to get the job done one way or another.
Those guys had a lot of forethought to even think about building their power plant and getting away from the public utility to buy their power. Now, that was a big endeavor for basically a group of farmers to sit down and say, we're going to build our own $30 million power plant.
Ray Webb was one of the original board members. He at one time worked for the co-op in acquiring land for the lake because Ray lived in the area, knew the people, they trusted Ray, and he was very instrumental in getting some of the property to build the lake.
SIPC had hired Tom Clevenger. He was at El Dorado to be the manager. They had finally got a trailer there on the property before they started plant construction, but there wasn't anybody there. Well, Dad was buying all these lands, and he didn't have any phone. We didn't have any phones out our way, so people knew that I was at Goreville High School, so they would call and ask me to tell Dad something. So I would relay the message home, and people would come and say, "Where's your dad?" Well, he's someplace, I don't know exactly where, but then I'd have to relay, and then he'd get with them on their property or whatever was used. They started out at $75 an acre. A lot of farmers wanted to sell it cheaper than that because they wanted to get rid of it because it flooded easily, and they paid more than that for some, but in today's economy that sounds like not very much, but back then it was quite a bit for a lot of them.
The power plant at the Lake of Egypt was actually one of the first inland power plants. At that time, most of them had been built on rivers, so this was the case where they actually went in and constructed a lake and placed the power plant on it. But back then nobody would interconnect with them, so they built 3 33 megawatt generators at the Lake of Egypt, any one of which was capable of carrying all of the load for the 3 co-ops. It's kind of an expensive way to go about it, that you have one that could be in maintenance, one on standby, and one operating. But that's the way they started.
If you think about it, it was difficult. I mean, they had to secure the land, they had to build the plant, they had to get the workers for the plant, they had to get the managers, they had to build a lake, and I know that it was not easy.
I'm sure there was a lot of people rooting for it not to work on the public utility side, and you know, I think that they did something that really opened a lot of people's eyes in Southern Illinois. You could actually do something here. You know, I visited the power plant when they were building it and saw the foundation poured, and I was there the day they dedicated the SIPC plant. And they flocked in there for the dedication at the Lake of Egypt, and that was a big deal. I mean, you know, Southern Illinois, Kenny Gray was our congressman, and he was influential in the power plant getting it built. My dad got to introduce the governor, which I thought that was a big deal. The director of REA was there.
Jim Holloway, he had the political connections. It made a big difference. And Jim had a personality, and really, he could deal on that very high level with the political friends as well as the 20-acre farmer. He just had that unique ability to walk up, look you in the eye, and tell you he was Jim Holloway and he'd like to talk to you. And you never felt uncomfortable. He was a really gifted individual.
It was already pretty well built when I come up in '63. I learned of this plant with Bill Monroe. He was the plant superintendent at the time, and I'd worked at Joppa for 8 years with Bill. I knew him well. It was just almost family-oriented, the whole thing, because when we started here, there was 5 or 6 people from Joppa, and we were kind of a family there, and we bonded more even here when we got here, and it was kind of like a family-owned powerhouse, you know.
They had about 4 or 5 guys that came from EEI at Joppa that had been down there several years, and they brought a world of knowledge up here to this plant.
Tom Clevenger had been the general manager of Southeastern Illinois Electric Co-op, and when they formed SIPC and it became a reality, he became the general manager, and he had been an engineer with REA. So he was very knowledgeable about the whole REA program at that time.
Mr. Tom Clevenger was a fine man. I don't think I've ever met a more down-to-earth person, a knowledgeable person, and a person that thought about your problems and what you had to do. It was a great anticipation how it would work when we started up, and the things that could happen. Having 8 years experience as a boiler operator at Joppa, I knew the possibilities that could happen, and not knowing how the equipment would hold up or how it would test out under actual usage, that was a great anticipation. When they closed the disconnects for the first time, we went online supplying power to our 3 co-ops. It was kind of like NASA when they landed the man on the moon. Not that much significant, but the same acceleration, you know.
People at EEI said this thing had never run, but about a half a dozen people made it run.
A part of the reason that this got to become a co-op was the promise to burn Southern Illinois coal. And the type of cyclone that they put in would burn Southern Illinois coal. You're talking about the 60s, but even at that point, technology and the ability to burn Southern Illinois coal was a part of the inception and the reason to be for Southern Illinois Power.
Coal was king in Southern Illinois. To be able to burn it and to burn it environmentally friendly, I think it's been a real asset.
We kept the miners around here in this area working. We bought all local coal. It was all trucked in, none by rail, and we kept truckers in business, and we kept the local coal miners working. All right, I started to work in SIPC in August of 1964. When I first started in the office, I was working with Jim Chapman. Then a little later we had a Jim Holloway that came with us, and a Jim Whitwright, and there was 3 Jims and Ed in that department. Well, I took a lot of their calls for them, and they'd want Jim. Whoever was there got it. Jim Chapman was a very intelligent man, I thought. He was the head of the transmission department, and he later got the assistant manager and then went to manager.
He was a technical person. He came from the plant. He understood every aspect of the plant. When I became manager of Southeastern, Jim Chapman was the manager here. Jim was one of the original Joppa employees and came up here, did a fantastic job as a manager.
We started out with those 3 little units at 33 megawatts apiece, and well, we thought we was big stuff, you know.
When I first got here, the transmission system consisted primarily of 4 radial 69,000 volt lines that radiated from the plant. We had, I think, 4 switching stations, one in each of the co-ops that we served. And over the period of time, we tied those radials together and made loops of the transmission system.
What we were trying to do was trying to loop the system so we could feed the customers from all kinds of directions and not have just one line that controls it all. We did a lot of that and continued to do that as we grew.
They were operating the 3 small units in isolation from all the other utilities in the area. There were no ties, so it was sometime in the early 70s they built the line into down to the Ohio River to tie into Barkley Dam, which gave us not only reliability for the power plant, but it also gave us an opportunity to buy preference power out of the Barkley Dam. Later on, Jim Chapman was able to initiate agreements with CIPS and Illinois Power for ties here at Marion and a tie with IP up at our Baldwin substation, which really helped out Egyptian Electric because we had 5 substations hanging on a 69 line coming out of the Campbell Hill switching station, and every time we had a fault on the line or the breaker malfunctioned at Campbell Hill, we had 5 substations out of service. And once we got the tie at Baldwin, well, that really increased the reliability on our system.
To build these tie lines to other utilities, it just made the system more reliable, plus the fact that if they had a problem, we could provide them power, and if we had a problem, they'd come to our rescue and help us out and keep the people on. That's the main factor, is keep the outages down as short a time as possible and get the people where they can utilize their electricity.
those ties not only improved the reliability and the load capacity of this co-op, but they also gave us an opportunity for outside sales that we never had before. And those outside sales were very, very lucrative for a number of years and kept rates down for us.
But we were growing, a lot of growth during the 60s and 70s, even somewhat into the 80s, and growing at about 7% a year. And when you do that, you can do a lot of things because you can keep your rates pretty steady.
I came here in 1977. When I came, Unit 4 was coming online. The big thing was Unit 4.
We knew it was going to cost an awful lot more per kilowatt than the 3 old units that we had, but we had to bite the bullet and go ahead even though the costs were going to be really high.
When I got up there, Unit 4 had been built and was online and running. It was built with a scrubber, which basically uses a liquid limestone. They crush it and mix it with water and spray it into the flue gas in order to remove the sulfur.
That was new. That was new technology. That was one of the few plants that had a scrubber when it was built in 1982 when it was completed. So we did things right.
Did we have a lot of problems with it? Well, sure. You run equipment, you got maintenance. That's all there is to it. It costs a lot. That's just part of making power.
Things were constantly changing due to the EPA laws. We were mandated to put the precipitators and the scrubbers in order to burn Southern Illinois coal. If we hadn't put them in, then we'd be hauling Western coal in like some of the other utilities.
We were only 3 members for a long time, and we felt that we were too small, really. We needed to get bigger, and the only way to do that really was to take in additional members.
At that time, the Clinton unit, the co-ops in Southern Illinois, was very unhappy with what had happened there. Some of those people agreed to come in with us. I think it's helped the other co-ops, and I know it's helped the original 3 because we've had to grow.
In working with the other distribution co-ops, had such wonderful relationships with them. They were cooperative, whatever we tried to do, you know, and everybody was great to work with.
Tim was like Tom Reed. He was a good fellow to work with too. He took care of his people, and he took care of the plant, and he would work with us and get us whatever we needed when it was time.
The boilers were pretty well worn out, and since we'd built those, they had passed a lot of air pollution rules, and the old boilers would not meet those. So we actually repowered units 1, 2, and 3. We kept the turbine generators, but built 1 boiler. At the time, it was the state-of-the-art fluidized bed boiler that actually burns limestone mixed with the coal to take the sulfur out.
When we built the fluidized bed, the 1, 2, 3 became 123. 1 unit. The fluidized beds, you know, you can burn more junk stuff, I call it, the carbon and what have you, a higher percentage, and that's been a big factor in SIPC's successes.
And then we added also a couple gas units for our peaking power that burn natural gas, and tapped one of the natural gas pipelines that runs through Southern Illinois and run it over to an area adjacent to the plant, and installed 2 gas units there.
You can sit there in the control room right now, and in about 20 minutes you can go from the CT over there just being on turning gear to making 80 megawatts of power.
When we think back at the last 50 years of Southern Illinois Power, it's hard not to forget that there are a tremendous number of people that contributed to this operation to where it is today. As each day goes forward, we know there will be more challenges, but the cooperative model and spirit speaks for itself. We're very impressed with the ability for the co-op program to continue its business decade after decade. The cooperative model puts those at the end of the line first, and we're proud to be a cooperative.
It's become more of a family type atmosphere as far as I'm concerned. Being a member of the board of directors and knowing all the employees, they always have the members' best interest at heart, and they're willing to serve and do whatever they possibly can to help you. So, in my opinion, that's the co-op difference.
When I first started, I got to fly over the lake with Jim Chapman, and he said, there's lots down here that you can buy. And I said, well, who would want to live down there in that jungle? Then about 15 years later, I got a chance to fly again, and it looked like a little city.
One thing I think of a lot when I look back, I spent 25 years looking across the fence at the golf course, and I've spent 25 years looking back at the power plant from the golf course.
It's quite an accomplishment. I mean, still yet, it was desire to do the best we could.
You see those smokestacks, it feels good to know you're a part of it and what this power plant has meant for this area.